I'm so happy to be here honoring Dan on May 6th, National Crepe Suzette Day. It actually is. I'm not kidding. I really struggled the last few weeks trying to nail down what I could say tonight that would capture Dan's brilliance as a teacher. A bit paralyzed, I emailed several of my classmates from Columbia, a couple of them quite heralded poets, and asked if they would send me a few lines describing how Dan affected their work or what Dan meant to them. Everyone made a very similar remark. Without Dan, I wouldn't be myself. I wouldn't be writing the poems I am today if I hadn't worked with Dan. Dan was simply a master at delving into a student poem and finding a clear, inspired voice. With his customary few words, and always with candor, he'd spotlight our authentic selves. It took me a little longer than many to find my voice, and it wasn't until several years after Columbia when Dan accepted one of my first playful poems and in his note said, "Fine poem!" that I knew I had connected to a truer voice. Here's one of my short poems, a more recent poem, rooted in his affirmation. And it's titled Coinkydink. A silly word for coincidence, I say to my child, has no place in a poem, but does rhyme with mink, which I don't like, or think, which I do, or tink, which is okay if my poem tinks or clinks or clanks, but I don't want it to wink. And who wants a poem to twinkle or be sold as a flea market trinket? Peddlers can stink, and rink is no good for a bard with bad knees. So kink takes the cake, a taste of the twisted, a tale of wigs misted, amidst coinkydinks, so merciful and sweet. I do feel privileged to be able to honor Dan and very grateful that I was able to study under him. He was such a gracious, gentle, mild-mannered professor, yet a powerful force in my life and the lives of so many young poets. It seems fitting tonight to celebrate Dan by reading from his book Tango, Senor Excellent. Senor Excellent. I was taken there as a child, the old farmer's market on Fairfax. Spectacular displays of fruit blossomed everywhere you looked. And men in white behind glass made candy, their giant vats of chocolate bubbling like the La Brea tar pits. And there was always something to eat whichever way you turned. But the important event at Farmer's Market was the stop in front of Senor Excellent. He had a vocabulary limited to one shrill catcall, a few opening bars of a song, and a number of hellos, varying in pitch and intensity. What I remember now is not what Senor Excellent said, but the wisdom and irony in the eyes of that minor bird. We stood around whistling and clicking, and one of us would inevitably try out a few words of endearment. Have you ever listened closely to what people say to talking birds when they think they are alone? Senor Excellent just looked at us, his expression one of agony and disgust. I can picture him resting on his mauled stick, calmly breathing and watching us, picking at something under his wings, going down for a seed, lifting himself back up with his candy corn beak. And I know that his life was not so different, witnessing the utterances of the human race. Congratulations, Senor Excellent.